It's always weird to hear your voice in your ears, though.
It's hard to get used to, right?
Totally is.
I've done, I think this is 180 and I still haven't quite gotten used to it.
Dang. Yeah, I looked through some of them and I'm just like, man, you've really found some people here. That's really cool. Do you enjoy doing what you do?
I would have to do 180. It'd be really rough to do this many, especially when you're doing 2, 3, 4 hours.
Yeah.
And not enjoy it.
Oh
That
my
would be
gosh.
challenging.
Right? Do you have like back-to-back people usually, or is it just one person at a time and then you have to edit it and take all the time there?
I've done multiple in a day. I've done 2, I think, max in a day. But normally there's 2 to 3 hours in between. So I can kind of decompress and then recharge to get back up and going.
I'm going to put my phone on airplane mode. There we go.
Because 2 back-to-back would be a little...
Oh, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a lot of listening.
That long would be...
Focusing.
You get burnt out. Yeah. Focusing is the hardest part.
Totally.
Just, okay, let me tune into the conversation and be present in the moment.
Oh, yeah. That is a challenge for sure. You're like, oh, what's for dinner?
Yeah. You start drifting and then you look back at the person. And you're like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be hearing this conversation. That's
Here we
what
are
I'm
together.
doing.
Yeah. Nice.
We started off on kind of a dark topic, but prior to your arrival, I was almost fitting because I don't know if you've seen this. I was watching the video of the Air Force member who lit himself on fire.
I haven't seen it yet, but I read a little bit about it though.
It's a pretty brutal video.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe the story, I haven't dug into the background of it. He lit himself on fire in protest to the Israel-Palestine situation going on.
Over Gaza.
Which that's a brutal way to go down.
Yeah.
Douse yourself in gasoline and then...
Yeah, I don't even know how somebody would get to a space like that mentally. To be able to, it's like a different level of sacrifice. I don't know how somebody gets there.
And dude, you have to think, is there a moment when you're going through that process and he's screaming "Free Palestine"? Is there a moment where he thinks, oh, I should not have done this?
I think that's the case for a lot of people who are suicide survivors. There is this level of clarity that happens in the midst of a suicide attempt, for maybe not for everybody, but for many people, that they are seeing that their life might be worth more than they have given it. And I don't know if this would be like a suicide it would be labeled as a suicide. I'm not sure necessarily. It seems like it's an altruistic sort of perspective for some people, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something in his brain that made him question his decision in that moment.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
If not suicide adjacent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of an uncomfortable way where you feel like you're sacrificing your life in pursuit of something rather than just removing yourself from the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a different level of martyrdom, I suppose.
Yeah, but tough to carry out.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Especially not knowing what the outcome will be from the act itself.
If there's any outcome at all.
If there's any outcome at all.
Which would be the hardest pill to swallow.
Yeah. Like,
and
was
if
this
he
worth it?
survives.
Is he still alive?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Watching the video, I would be amazed. I mean, they blur it out. So you don't see, but you can see the flames. And
yeah.
He was on fire for quite a while.
It's really tragic.
That's the world we're in.
It is
the world. That doesn't
world.
seem so crazy when you take into context how absurd life is right now. That, oh yeah, we have people lighting themselves on fire.
Yeah.
Just another Monday.
I don't know. I don't know if anything's new with it though. I feel like the conflicts among human beings have existed since Cain killed Abel, since before that. That sense of death to the opposition, or silencing the voices of those that disagree, or I think that this is something that has been in existence forever. Overcoming enemies, overwhelming enemies. Who is my enemy? Canceling them, silencing them, belittling them, mocking them. making them small so we feel bigger, stronger, more powerful. That is the way that the world has been working forever.
A tale as old as time.
Yeah. The writer of Ecclesiastes says that there's nothing new under the sun, and I think that is absolutely true. And so, what do we do with that as human beings? Like, do we go into nihilism? Do we like sit into a space of hopelessness or believing that there's nothing we can do, or like the sense of indifference? Like, well, I'm not even gonna pay any attention to it because it's just too overwhelming. And there's a sense of like, there is a compassion fatigue that happens in us as humans. The sense of like, I can't handle anymore. I've got enough on my plate just with my kids and my work and my family and my community that it's hard to think out past that. And I don't fault people for that whatsoever. But there is a level of like digging deeper into the spaces that we thought we couldn't quite get to, like plumbing the depths of our own darkness and our own senses of silencing voices around us and our own desire to be the one with the last word in the room. What's happening internally within us? And then what does it look like to put that into practice in our day-to-day lives? And then how does that impact the way that we see the world around us as well?
And the ability to slip into that indifferent mindset is almost so seductive.
Oh, totally.
That I can just, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I'm a small fish in a big ocean, and there's so much going on that let me just pull back and ignore it and suppress it in some weird way.
Yeah. I think it's a survival technique in some ways. Like there's really only so much that we can hold. And there's this reality that if we try to hold it all, then it's like a fallacy of control, the sense of I can do this, I can do everything, I can handle everything. And that, it pulls us towards burnout. Our bodies start to shut down. We don't take care of ourselves. I think that that's one of the reasons why in the Bible, God instituted this practice of Sabbath, which is this ceasing, essentially, letting go, resting for one day during the week, and releasing all expectations of productivity, releasing all expectations of having that last word, or making sure that people see you in a certain way. Whatever it is, it's like signing off of all social media, powering down your cell phone, not working around the house, taking your computer out, like just all the things of all the ways that we want to produce and find some sort of meaning to our identity throughout the week. We're saying, no, right now I'm just going to rest and recognize that I am not in control. I don't have the last word here, and that's okay. And I can just be still.
Yeah, that idea of stillness is a significant challenge just in my life. I, as someone who fully embraces productivity to the extreme, the idea that, okay, I could take a day and just decompress scares me a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Well, and so much of our sense of identity comes from what we produce. We understand ourselves based on what we've produced that week, what we are accomplishing. And I think those are beautiful things. I think that's how we're designed to find our sense of self-worth is what we are to create. We're meant to be co-creators with our creator. But sometimes we get lost in all of that and we lose ourselves. And that's when we have to come back to ourselves and come back to the truth that no matter what we produce or don't produce, no matter what abilities we have or disabilities or inabilities, all of it, like, that's not the most important thing about us as humans. Like your belovedness, your acceptance, who you are as an individual person, that you are so loved. That is the most important thing about you. Not the podcast you do, not the relationships you have, not the home you own or the cars you drive or how many kids you have. Just that you are so freaking loved. And sometimes we have to stop everything else to actually see that.
Crazy concept in today's world.
Yeah.
That you can be loved for something other than the value of what you produce.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a crazy concept.
Even saying that, I'm kind of like, yeah, but you should still just keep your nose to the grindstone.
I think it's important. It's really important for us to produce, to contribute to this world. So much of the best parts of life is allowing other people to know they're loved as well. And part of the contribution that you do as a podcaster is to give people the space to express their greatest joys, their hopes, their dreams, their brokenness and shadow sides, whatever it is that they feel like they need to share. And you are creating a platform for them to do that. And that brings you a sense of value because you're able to uplift another person. And that's part of what it means to be human. When we're uplifting each other, when we're like cheering each other on, it actually like, it allows our identity to become more concrete within ourselves. Like it fortifies our identity in some ways. So when we fight each other, when we're pointing fingers at the others, when we're blaming, when we're saying they're the enemy, they're the ones that are wrong, it actually deteriorates our soul. It corrodes everything because that's not how we were designed to live. We were designed to uplift and give a voice to people that are oftentimes voiceless. So yeah, it's a hard thing though. It's a hard thing to practice, but it is so worth it. I think I just read somewhere recently, I can't remember where it was. It was like some sort of post somewhere. I think maybe then the New York Times. Anyway, about how important it is for people just to take a day of laziness a week. And I'm like, that's a biblical thing. We can call it lazy. That's fine. But lazy is such a negative concept. It's like there was this thing on my parents' wall when I was growing up, and it was like right outside of the bathroom. And it was like some sort of embroidered, stitched like quote. And being homeschooled and not having a TV, I did not have really much opportunity to waste time, except to read like Nancy Drew novels and all the books. And so the only place that I could find space to do that was in the bathroom. And sometimes I would be in the bathroom for like a half an hour reading the book and not doing my schoolwork. And then I'd leave the bathroom and see on the wall this little stitching that said, "Do you love life? Then why do you waste time? For that is what life is made out of." And I'd always feel so guilty because then I'm like, oh, I'm so lazy doing this thing. So laziness has this negative concept. But the reality is that we are meant to release all of that, to release the shame and the guilt that we might feel of just being still and claiming it as an important thing. Obviously, there's a sense of wasting time and not being responsible for your actions and all sorts of things that we could go into with that. But I think it's almost a spiritual practice of wasting time sometimes, especially with God. Was that hard for you to get to a place where you could get there? Oh, it still is. I've been practicing Sabbath for like more aggressively, I should say, or intentionally for like the last 15 years. But even still, it is so hard because there's all these things I need to do. And instead of trusting that it'll still be there tomorrow and I can get it done tomorrow and there's no rush or hurry that I need to have, instead of just really allowing it to be what it is, I beat myself up. I shame myself sometimes. I think that this is more important than playing. So usually what I have to do is I have to get out of the house. I have to go on a walk or go to the beach. I have to get away from the daily responsibilities. Definitely turn my phone off. Right now we're in a season called Lent in the church. It's a 40-day season of kind of walking with Jesus in a wilderness existence. It's recognizing our own mortality. It's recognizing our own, the lack that we have, and that it's okay to be in a space of lack, knowing that Christ is with us in that. And most often when people practice this spiritual season, they fast something for those 40 days. And they don't fast it on the Sabbath, or Sunday is often for Christians what they consider their Sabbath. It's not really called Sabbath at that point. But anyway, the thing that I've done for myself is I've taken social media off of my phone. And that it's been hard, but it's been good. And I've recognized how much I am wanting to scroll or to numb. And so I think there's a difference between between resting, being intentional with that rest, and just numbing out and avoiding. And so it's different. It's a practice.
I think most people are in that numbing phase.
Yeah.
Because how many of us get sucked into a scroll and it goes from 10 minutes to an hour?
Yeah.
And you feel worse. You achieved nothing. It wasn't active rest or enjoyment in what you're doing. You're just mindlessly scrolling. And then you check out and realize, oh, great, now I wasted an hour. And now you feel the pressure packed on by 10 of now I have so much to do and I just wasted an hour. Let me go back to work.
Yeah.
Cell phones.
Yeah. It's a time sucker. And they're great. Like social media is beautiful. It's like connecting and makes us feel like we belong in some spaces. But that's the best parts of it. It's really hard to maintain those parts when it's designed for us to be addicted to it. So there's
specifically designed for us to be addicted to it.
Yes, I know. So there's like kind of a fine line between the beauty and the grossness. Living in that tension is really important. And I think that's part of what it means to be human, is this sense of living in that tension, of recognizing that we have been hurt, that there are people out there that we would consider our enemies, and knowing that they have done those things or that they've caused other people pain, while also recognizing that Jesus says that we are to love our enemies. So how does it look like to live in that tension between the addiction of social media to the beautiful parts of social media, from the desire to numb out or continually produce and the pull towards rest? It's recognizing both belong, and one isn't more right than the other, but living in that space of tension instead of ignoring it, I guess.
Or just passively walking through it.
Yeah.
So you've given social media up for Lent?
Yeah. Well, except with Lent, it's a weird thing. Every Sabbath, you aren't meant to fast that day. So if you gave up like alcohol for Lent, then it's meant to be a celebration. The Lord's Day is what Christians call it, so that we celebrate Christ's resurrection every Sunday. So you can imbibe on that day if you gave up alcohol. You can eat meat that day if you gave up meat or chocolate or whatever it is. But the idea isn't to like put social media back on my phone on that day and just be like, well, now I'm scrolling all day. I'm going to get lost in this.
For lost time.
Yeah, totally. That's not the way it's supposed to be. You don't want to get like wasted or something just because it's the Lord's Day. It's just recognizing that our fasts aren't the end all and be all.
I didn't know that you could break it on Sundays.
Yeah.
I was brought up pretty traditional Catholic.
Okay.
And the idea was you're sucking it up for the whole 40 days. But we had the cheat of you're giving up meat, but on Fridays you're giving up meat, but you can have seafood.
Right.
Which always felt a little, you can't have meat, but we can eat seafood.
I mean, yeah.
What are we doing here?
As humans, we're always looking for the like workaround. How can I
fudge the rules on this?
How can I make it work for my benefit? Yeah, there's actually 47 days in Lent, but we only observe 40 days of the fast because 46 days. I'm sorry, 46 days of Lent. Yeah.
So in a Christian sense, are you giving up meat?
Not me personally.
Okay.
No, mine was social media.
I could get into this one.
Yeah.
See? Okay, now I'm checking back in.
I think it's important not to just, and this is just my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of other opinions and beliefs out there, and everybody is entitled to their own. I'm not worried about that whatsoever. But I think it should be prayerful that it's intentional, that this is a spiritual practice that God is inviting you into, with knowing that you'll be with God the whole time. You're not alone in it. And so I believe it should be a little uncomfortable. So if, depends on what the discomfort is. If you have a sweet tooth and giving up sugar for Lent, that's a big one. That's uncomfortable. Every time that you are craving a brownie or whatever it is an opportunity for you to then be aware of your own belovedness, that you are totally loved. It's an opportunity for you to be aware of how quick this life is, how fast it passes, and your own mortality, recognizing that life is but a vapor. It's dust, and just blessing God and all of that, giving thanks to the Lord. It's an opportunity to sing songs or go on a walk or be in a meditative state. That's what a fast is meant to do. It's meant to turn our attention and our affections back to God.
Are you fasting at all in the process?
Just social media.
Just social media?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's going okay.
What does it look like outside of that for you? Are you praying more during this time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of people do bring on another form of like a spirituality in that sense. I go on a morning prayer walk every morning, and it's I use an app with it. It's like a 13-minute walk that starts with usually some sort of a chant or some music, and then has a scripture reading and some guiding questions, and then like a prayer at the end. And it's just really beautiful. It's incredibly grounding for me to do that.
Yeah, they say that walking is grounding in a way.
Yeah.
So we would all benefit if we just took like a 15-minute walk every day.
Totally. It's so good to walk. And I know it's like in a culture that we give like a half an hour towards our physical health a day or whatever.
If that.
Yeah. It's like, well, we got to do as much as we can in 15 minutes. Go. Whereas a walk, even if you do a brisk walk, it's something that I think is really healing to our bodies. I go on a lot of walks with people. It's like one of my favorite things ever. Because I feel like, like you and I were sitting across the table from each other. And it's great because we're both people who are able to talk and communicate just fine. But a lot of folks, it's hard to like really open up if they're looking at somebody in the eye. And so I feel like shoulder to shoulder is it's just healing in a lot of ways instead of face to face. And the walking, the back and forth movement that we make is, I don't know if you're familiar with a therapeutic thing called EMDR. It's like a eye movement sort of a thing. I'm not a therapist, so I can't speak too much to it, but it has that sort of quality of this left-right brain movement that allows a sense of safety to occur for people to process things a little bit more deeply when they're going back and forth like that with their bodies.
When you have the added aspect, you're outside.
Yeah.
You might be in the sun, which is just a benefit into itself.
Yeah.
And if you're with someone, you can just chat.
Yeah.
And maybe that conversation goes somewhere. Maybe it stays light, but you're in somebody else's company and you're not doing anything. You're not distracted by your phone.
Yeah.
You're just existing.
Yeah. It's pretty great. How about you? Like when you have these sorts of conversations with people, well, why did you get into this in the first place, if I can ask that?
I've been asked that question so many times,
well,
and I've never given a great answer. Every time I listen back to it, I'm always thinking, oh, just stop talking because it's not great. I think I was losing my mind.
Okay.
I don't think I liked who I was becoming as a person. It was peak COVID.
Yeah.
I started this in 2020. Had just come home from school because of COVID. Our school was shut down. Had hung out with some friends right after I got off the plane and was spending time with them. Turns out somebody was on the plane that had COVID, potentially. And so I get the notice from the airline and they're like, quarantine. And all I could think was, oh, I'm a piece of shit. Because one of my friends, his girlfriend at the time, now wife, was pregnant. And all I was thinking, what if I was infected, got them sick, and something happened to the kid?
Yeah.
What did I do? So then I didn't really leave my house for, I think it was like a couple of months after that. I was pretty isolated, just scrolling social media. And I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was on a bad track. And for whatever reason, I haven't fully realized it yet. I felt like I needed to do this. I don't know if it was this specifically or this was a medium to talk to people in the real world, but I did it. That's see, even saying that still doesn't fully encompass where I was.
Well, it sounds to me like what you're saying is there was a need in you, and you probably experienced that other people had that need as well in them. And there's no better way to connect with people than having a conversation. And for a lot of people, it's hard to have conversations. They don't even know what to talk about.
Well, and how many get a conversation in this format?
Totally.
Where we're locked in.
Yeah.
I'm not on my phone. You're not on your phone. We're not eating. We're not doing anything else other than talking. You've got your headphones on. I'm in your ears. You're in my ears. We're locked in.
Yeah.
You don't get that.
It's true. It's true. It's kind of a beautiful experience. And you're doing this with live humans. A lot of people do podcasts through Zoom or whatever because it's not local. Do you ever do those too?
Yeah, I've done some Zoom ones.
How does that work out for you?
In person is the best.
Yeah.
I've gotten better at the Zoom ones. I tried them back during COVID. I think I did 2 and stopped because it was just it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
But now to kind of reach out to more people that I would like to talk to, I've re-implemented them and they're a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think I've grown a little bit so I can handle it a little better. But in person, nothing beats it. That's kind of why I've, slowly tried to build this out to this format. But
do you enjoy what you do?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I enjoy this.
Have you made some friends in this way of doing things?
I think so.
Cool.
I think so. My problem is because I'm such a workaholic, translating it outside of the studio. I've been thinking I'm a little worried about how I'm tracking because this has now consumed all of my social participation in the world. Yeah. I'm not out doing other things. It's this, and then I'm working or editing on this, and then I come back in. And so it's like a double-edged sword because I'm getting a lot of social interaction. I'm meeting a ton of people. I'm meeting you.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not out in the world in a different form, I guess. I'm not going out and doing other things. It's this, and then it's behind the scenes work.
It's like really connecting and also isolating at the same time.
Complete isolation.
Totally.
Which feels dangerous, but then I'm getting this side of it. So I'm kind of
in that tension.
Battling. Yeah.
It's that tension. Like,
absolutely.
What does it look like to live with both? And also, I think in the tension, we get to like tip our toes into new spaces. Like really, I don't know, what does it look like for you to challenge yourself into a different form of relationship building? It would be interesting. Even like having I don't need to tell you what to do.
No, yeah.
Yeah, like having multiple people online or on the podcast at the same time and creating like almost like a family unit of sorts, or having a co-host with you. I mean, there's so many opportunities for podcasting today. But what I do recognize is that there are many people who like their voice and are willing to have their voice heard.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people.
No?
Mm-mm. Prior to this, I didn't even post on social media. I've often been told that I like to play my cards very close to the chest. And I think I'm still surprised that I do this in some ways because this is very not private. And going into it, I was a very private person and still am in a lot of regards. But in order to do this, you have to open up a lot more. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If I'm sitting here and we're lying to each other for an hour, that's going to be a rough conversation. Neither of us are going to enjoy it. You have to be honest.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, right? That would be an instance where we'd start checking our phones and be like, okay, can we just
let's wrap this up.
Yeah, 15 minutes, I think we're okay.
Yeah, yeah. Have you experienced like some times with people that you're just like, this is blowing my mind right now?
I feel that way almost in every podcast, for better or worse. Sometimes it's because things went sideways, but I'm still grateful that we did it. Yeah. Other times it's just having a friend in here and we're just BSing for a couple hours, just hanging out. It's almost like a time warp when you come into this room because there's no natural light, there's no clock. You just get sucked into it.
Yeah. And
then you're almost wasting time, but you're not. You're killing time, but it's
intentional.
Yeah.
Totally.
And that, I think, is also a lost art today, where you're intentionally just passing time with interesting people.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at this. We'd spoken a little bit. Shout out to Scott, 100% humble. Yeah. But prior to that, we don't really know each other. And yet we're here having a conversation.
How wonderful.
How great. But you don't get that. And so I think some part of me was yearning for that connection.
Yeah.
And this has been a pretty nice way to get that.
Good. Good. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. I really appreciate it.
That's my little therapy session
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, I could dig deeper if you wanted me to, but
No, well, I mean, do you struggle with that as a pastor? Obviously, you have to be open with the people that are coming to hear you speak.
Yeah.
Is that a quarrel with you internally where you try to draw a line of how much do I want to share about myself versus what I want to keep masked just for me?
Yeah, that's a good question. I very much value church life that is incredibly vulnerable and honest. And so I try to model that as much as I can. But at the same time, the church is not my confessional. So I don't want to ever have my congregation have to carry the daily burdens of my own life. So it's kind of a dance in a way, like what will I share as vulnerably as possible and as honestly as possible? And what do I hold close to myself and to my husband and my family? And now that my kids are also older, I have 3 teenagers, I can't share that aspect because it's not my story to share. So there's a lot of great anecdotes and metaphors and examples I can use that can connect with the heartstrings of the congregation when I'm preaching a sermon for my own life and my own family. But it's not fully my own story any longer. When they were little, it wasn't a big deal, but that wouldn't be fair to them.
It's interesting hearing you say that in a world where people don't have that sense anymore. That it's almost, we can post whatever regarding whoever out into the world, even if it's not our story. You have parents that are constantly posting their kids, sharing their kids' stuff. And it's like, does your kid want that out there?
Yeah.
Do you want that out there? But that's the world we're in.
Yeah, I've learned it didn't come naturally because I was the person that would want to post everything about everything with my kids. And I've learned that I need to ask their permission first and show them the photo or the video or whatever it is and tell them why I'd like to post it and get their permission. And 9 times out of 10, it's a solid no to post. So I don't. It's usually the ones that I get to post are the family photos that we all are in the family picture together. But yeah, it's been an interesting thing. I've had to learn as I go, for sure. And I think that's true for every parent, though. Every parent that's raising kids from each age stage on, you just kind of have to adapt and shift with the emotional state of your family. And I will tell you, teenagers have a lot of emotional states that I am learning and avoiding as much as possible.
Well, especially with boys.
Yeah.
At least I can speak for myself. You like to stay a little more low key, especially when your mom's posting stuff. You're like, okay, maybe we dial this back just a tad bit.
Yeah. My daughter at one point, she's like, "Can you please change your Instagram to private because my friends are going on your Instagram to look at pictures of me?" And I'm like, "Oh,
didn't think about that.
That makes sense. Yes, I will. Oh my goodness, I didn't even think about that." So, yeah.
But you still want to relate those stories in some sense because they're also your stories.
They are mine.
You're their mom.
Yeah.
And so you're actively participating in this walk through life with them, but it involves them too. It's not just your story. I don't have any kids. And so all my stories are just my stories. And they might involve my friends or my family, but I think it's a little different when it comes to your kids and their part in that.
Yeah. And I think that's true for anybody. I've talked to different authors before, and they're like, well, if people are in relationship with me, then they might be in my book. And it's just a risk you have to take if you want to be in a relationship with me. And I can definitely see that. And then I've seen other authors that speak of things that are more abstract or internal processes of themselves. And I think it's another type of dance. It's another kind of tension that we live in. I think it's really important to ask permission to those that we write about or share about or all the stories, even though they are it's my experience. It is my story to tell. If another person's involved, then the kind thing to do is to include them as well. And sometimes you might get a hard no, and that sucks, especially when it's a good story to share. And I think when there's a hard no, maybe that story was for you just to, I should say for myself, maybe me writing out that story and not sharing it anywhere or posting it anywhere was just for me, was for myself just to process and come to terms with what happened. And it's not something that I have to share everywhere. And that takes some time. Usually I have like a little bit of a hissy fit in my mind, like, this would be great though. It could impact people. And then I get over it. And I'm like, okay, it impacted me and that's enough. We'll move on.
I was going to say the writer in you has to scream at that just a little bit.
Totally.
Just let me share the story.
Yeah.
It might make a difference in somebody's life.
I know. And everything that I share is first for me and then for others. Even the sermons I write, I recognize that every sermon I write, at least in the last number of years, it's like God has given it for me because I need to hear it. And then I'm able just to like share it out and be like, maybe other people need to hear it too. But even if no one else needs to hear it, I needed to hear this. So it's kind of fun and hard.
So it comes back to the idea of the tension.
It's the tension.
You keep touching on.
Yeah.
Which tension makes life interesting, but it's like light and dark in a sense, where you have that constant tug and pull.
Yeah.
And you can get lost in either side of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't grow without tension. You know, you think of like if you work out, the only way that your muscles will grow is if you provide some sort of tension to them. That there's some sort of weight that you're bearing. And actually, like to continue forth with that metaphor, I guess, if you look at any like bodybuilding exercise regimes, most people who are like trainers will say that it's important to do the same exercises every week for like 6 to 8 weeks before changing them up. And so you're like, I mean, it's kind of boring after a while. Like, oh, last Monday I did this exact same thing. And last Tuesday I did this exact same thing. And you go up and weight a little bit here and there, or go up in reps as needed. But that tension, it has to continue forth long enough for the muscles to build and stay. And then you can change it up, of course, and do little tweaks and things like that. But yeah, like that tension is the only way that we grow, I think.
And it's challenging to stick with it long enough to actually see the results. You have to live in the tension. You have
to live in the tension. Totally. Which is so hard because I don't know about you, but I know that for myself, like when things hurt, I want to avoid it. I love avoiding pain. I love, I mean, I would go on a run and every once in a while I'd be like, if I fell and tripped, I'd have to walk. Maybe I should fall and trip. Like that's how much I love to avoid pain. I am able to push through most of the time, but I think as human beings, we are quick to give up on ourselves and on each other and on the things that we've committed to. And I think, to come back to Sabbath, I think that's one of the things that Sabbath helps us do. It helps us to not give up, to continue forth, knowing that rest is coming and that we start from rest. The start of our week is resting and then we end our week in rest essentially and started in rest and ended in rest. And I think when we do those sorts of things, we can live in spaces that are harder, longer until they become concrete experiences, lasting ones.
You seem very comfortable in your faith.
I am.
How did you get connected with God? Were your parents religious?
Yeah. I was born in a very religious home, Christian family. My dad was a missionary, essentially. Local though, like not local here, but in the Bay Area. And he did, it was like Boy Scouts with a Christian emphasis, discipleship oriented. And that's what he did for a living. And then I was homeschooled and my only friends were youth kids from our church. I mean, it was just like, you
were ingrained in it.
Very ingrained, for better or worse. It was very conservative in many ways. And like I grew up in a place where women weren't even really allowed to pray in front of the church ever. So to be a female pastor it took me a long time to receive that or to accept it, I should say. but yeah, I grew up in that sort of a home, and I accepted Jesus pretty easily. I did not accept the church or religious people very easily. I remember going to a Christian high school once homeschooling was done, and all of my friends were the skaters and potheads and the ones that would essentially get kicked out of the school. And I remember being so frustrated that was their experience, that this Christian school was saying, we will not tolerate you. It's not that we won't tolerate the behavior, I understand that, but we won't tolerate you any longer, and you are no longer allowed to be here. And I was just like, isn't this where all the potheads should go? Like, isn't this where all the people that cuss and everybody that doesn't quite belong anywhere else, this is exactly where they should be. I was furious. And that was hard. That was really hard for me. And I think that's always just kind of been my personality of like, I feel like there's an inconsistency between the Jesus I love and the people who say that they follow him, or the people by name, I suppose, who say they follow him. Yeah. So it took me a while, and it still does. I sometimes have a hard time with overly Christian people.
Did any of that cause you to rebel against your faith? Or you were able to separate out what you believe from the people who claim to believe the same thing?
That's a good question. I think I had a lot of rebellion internally. I never left the church. I never created some sort of huge hissy fit. I remember like being maybe 18 when I scheduled a meeting with my senior pastor and told him that he was wrong about something. That was a big deal. But other than that, like, yeah, I've always been very drawn towards Jesus, and I believe so much that the gathered community of Jesus is the hope of the world, can be, should be. And I never want to give up on that. And I want to see that through, at least in my life and in the people that I get to walk with for however long I have breath in my body. Yeah.
How did that translate to you becoming a pastor?
Yeah,
it seems like it was pretty rigid structure.
It was. My husband and I helped start a church called Catalyst almost 18 years ago now, 17 and a half years ago. So it's been a long time. And I came as the nice pastor's wife, supportive and whatever it took to support, however I could help. And about that same time, we started adopting our kids. And one of the pastors that was the main lead teaching pastor was wanting other voices, and he had a hope for female voices. And so his wife and myself taught maybe like 2 or 3 times a year. And the first time I ever taught at church, I was just like, I feel like I'm made to do this, and I don't think I'm allowed to. And so I don't know what to do about that. Like, I remember praying and being like, God, why would you have this thing kindle in my heart that I'm not allowed to pursue? And that took me a long time. It took me a long time to receive that calling, I think, is what I would call it, a calling, and accept it. For a long time, when I would teach, I would just pretend that I was sharing. I'm just sharing my heart. I did not want to take that level of authority. And then at one point, the leadership team said, it's time that you become a pastor, Bethany. And I said, I do not want that title. You cannot make me have that title. And they said, we know that you don't want that title. And maybe you don't need that title, but there's some people at the church that need you to have that title, that they need to see that title means something to them. And I said, okay. And I have a hard time with like hierarchy. I feel like, obviously different people have different gifts, and we can name those gifts, but that doesn't mean that person or those people are more important than anybody else. Everybody has gifts. So titles are hard for me all the time. But that's okay. Lately, I've just not even used that title for myself at church. Usually, I've always just said, hi, I'm Bethany. I'm one of the pastors here. And now I just say, hi, I'm Bethany. I'm glad you're here. And That's fine for me, unless somebody says it different, I suppose.
Do you think that kind of friction stems from the rigidity from when you were a child of women in the church, that you're still kind of battling that out?
I think it's more the battle that I think it's the battle of the us versus them mentality that is really good at being fostered in a church setting. And I think the church should be the place that unravels all those senses of hierarchy. Again, I don't think that means that everybody should have the same kind of a voice of like leadership. And there's some people that are called to leadership, and there's some people that are called to other areas, and that's okay. But I don't know. I'm very much about everybody's voice mattering. Mattering, is that a word? I don't know. But so something that we do at our church is I usually prepare a message, or whoever's teaching prepares a message, and it's a lot of conversation. So we ask a lot of questions, and we read the scripture and let it sit, and then what's coming up for you in the scripture? What have you seen taught of this before? And kind of pausing and letting people reflect and express what's coming up. And then usually I try to, at the end, say, like, am I missing anything? Was there anything that you felt like I could have done differently, or there was something that was off in what you think I said? And that way, I don't know, it's just, I always want to create a space where everybody's voice is just as important as everybody else's. And I think that the only way that we learn and grow is if we learn and grow from each other. So
I think that's 90% of what I'm doing here.
It is. I can see that.
Trying to cheat my way through life, in a sense, by learning from other people.
Yeah.
And just challenge my own ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty fun. Yeah.
Talking to people can surprise you. And we don't do that enough. We don't go into a conversation without any preconceptions.
Yeah.
And you touched on the idea of, the church is supposed to be one of those places. And yet it seems to be a breeding ground for that hierarchical nature where only certain people get to talk. I mean, from a Catholic standpoint, we have that totally ingrained, right? The Pope is the lead guy. Mm-hmm. And it just trickles down throughout the churches, and then you're subservient in that sense, where you just show up, you listen, and then you go about your day.
Yeah. And I think that doctrine is important, and different books of discipline are important, and all the church fathers and the people that have poured into the theological understandings of the Bible and of the church is absolutely important. And submitting to those voices, I think, is also important at times. But I think it can easily, the structure, the system can become something that we look to more than Jesus. And it's easy to get that switched around.
Well, I think it can become corruptible when it's so ingrained of who is the power structure and who is not. And you're looking to these individuals rather than to scripture, to God. I mean, people are just so dicey.
Yeah.
And to create this powerful figure, people can kind of go off the rails when they start getting that much power.
Well, and the church is kind of set up to be a place that can create platforms for narcissists pretty easily. And having, it can get really messed up. And you can look at any news article today that has to do with religions, and most often it has to do with somebody using the power that they were given in a corruptible way, in a way that was actually incredibly damaging and toxic and traumatic and hurtful and abusive towards women and usually marginalized people. So it's, we can see it everywhere. What was it like for you to grow up Catholic?
What was it like for me to grow up Catholic?
And what does that mean, growing up Catholic?
To grow up Catholic?
Yeah. For you.
The word that comes to mind is indoctrination in some sense. That's how I would sum up my experience, I think. It was very rigid. You would go to Sunday school, you would go to church, First Communion, baptism, obviously, confirmation. You would go through the steps, and it was like you were working through this very structured process. and then you would be a good person. That you were just being, it almost felt like cattle in a sense.
Like a pipeline.
Yeah, you can't question. You're just being fed through this process. And then once you check all the boxes, then you're done. And so for me, I was always looking for the point where I could be done. Okay, I don't want to go to Sunday school. I was constantly pushing back against my parents. And then finally, after I reached the end of the process, I just checked out. I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I was looking for an excuse to get out. And so for me, I feel like my faith, even saying my faith, I kind of, it feels like weird to say that. I feel like I'm in a constant state of conflict with the idea of faith and how it relates to me. And I don't know how much of what I believe or think was attributed to that indoctrination of just this pipeline process versus what I now believe as an adult. And part of me almost doesn't want to know. So I keep it tucked in a box and just don't address it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to find an answer to it, or I'm afraid of the answer I might find. So I just kind of put it to the side.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people do that. I think it's a safety technique. Sometimes if we open up that box, it could be just too painful or too vulnerable to see what's in there.
Yeah, it might be liberating.
Maybe
there are answers in that box that you've been searching for, but you won't allow yourself to go there to look for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you find, knowing that as a human being, you are a spiritual person? I think every single person is a spiritual person. We have our mental health and our physical health and our emotional health. And I believe spiritual health is just as vital of a part that is oftentimes neglected in our society. How do you access that part of yourself or allow yourself to access that part? Or do you?
I don't.
Okay.
I think would be the easiest way to summarize that.
Do you ever feel like something is missing?
Yeah. I think that's 99% of my life is searching for something.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting moment on Scott's podcast. He was talking to Brian Hall, who runs the mission, Eureka Rescue Mission. Shout out to Brian Hall. Really awesome guy. I've had him on my podcast. And he was talking to Scott, and he said something that was so simplistic, and yet I haven't been able to shake it out of my head. He said, the light of the Lord is brightest in the dark. And you hear that and you think, yeah, obviously. But for whatever reason, I can't shake that idea. I've been thinking about it. He did the podcast, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago now. And I've probably thought about that every day. And it's such a simplistic idea.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the most simple and also the most profound. Where have you experienced that? Or have you?
I don't know. I feel a little weird talking about this.
We don't have to. If you're
No, I'm happy that we are, but it's just, I'm kind of reflecting as we're going through this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that I've been feeling pulled in this direction, but it's been on my radar more so in the past few years, I guess, than it has at any point in my life. I backed off from the church after I went through confirmation, checked out, never gave it another thought. And for whatever reason, over the past couple of years, it's been seeming to creep into my life without me looking for it, without me searching for it. And I'm still just kind of trying to keep it in that box.
Yeah.
But then you have moments like that where I'm just passively producing Scott's podcast, and it kind of worms its way back into where I have to think about it.
Yeah, it F's you up.
Yeah, and then you can't stop thinking about it. You're like, Jesus, I didn't need this.
I love it when that happens. Oh my gosh. I think that we all as human beings, we go through so many dark periods of our lives. Like you saying, I left church and I haven't given it a second thought. You left that, but I don't think God ever left you. I think God's given you a million thoughts. Like God is constantly thinking about you. And I don't doubt that for a second. And I don't think that God's thoughts of you or your thoughts of God's are meant to be contained in a box or contained in a church or contained in a denomination or a religion. Because I think the moment that we try to contain God is the moment that we're making God in our own image, trying to pacify God to fit some sort of perspective that we have as fallible humans. I think that when we allow God to be beyond our imagination, to be that light in the darkness, freaking can't even define what that light is. I know it when I see it. I can't tell you what it is. I can't give you 5 steps of how to experience it. I can't write a dissertation on it. I can't do any of those things. I just know that when I see it, I can feel it when I feel it. Like there's nothing that I can do to explain it away or to contain it. I think when we allow God to be so much broader and bigger than the church has boxed God into, it's like there that we hear that still small voice that's always been with us all along. And it will blow our minds every time, because we will recognize that I have not been alone, not even once. That I've been loved and cared for and seen my whole life. And usually the light shines, it shines brightest in the darkness. And so when we allow ourselves to sit in the darkness, which is a freaking scary place to be, something can be shining out. It's usually when we plumb into those spaces that we can pull out what has been there all along.
Do you think that you have to make an active decision to go there to be found in that way?
Yes. Not all the time. But I think yes. I think it's an act of the will of like. And this is why I like Lent. It like the process of Lent is allowing the comforts, the things that we pad our lives with, to be stripped away. And the more we strip, the more exposed and vulnerable we are, which is really scary. And so it's saying yes to letting go of some of those things that pad our lives, because the padding keeps us safe, emotionally and mentally safe. And obviously you have to. That's so vague. I know it's so vague. Like, what does that even mean? Let me think of an example from my own life. I think for myself, when I release like the social media sort of things, or even my normal routines, the everyday thing that I do every day. And it's like almost like I have to throw a stick in the spoke. Like I feel like I might stub my toe. I feel like I might hurt myself, but it makes me have to walk with more intention. And that's still very vague. I'm not sure, but I will say that yes, I think it is a type of intention. I think it is like allowing your heart to be willing to go into those spaces, however that may look for you. Whether it's like renting a cabin from Airbnb for 3 days and with no cell service and just like being in that space, writing whatever it is you need to write, or painting, or whatever creation that you need to do. Or it's going to the beach every day for like a whole week for an hour and just sitting in the silence, whatever it is. I think God meets us in those spaces when we are seeking. But sometimes God just meets us when we're not seeking. And that happens too. We didn't even see it coming, but yet God shows up.
I feel like that's part of my problem is I feel like I'm not seeking, and yet it's just creeping in. And part of me is like, no, go back to the box.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not. I don't know if it's a lack of intention, probably, or a fear of what might be in the box, or just a questioning. I was brought up after I left the church, so to speak. I went very hard into sciences and math and went to college, and it felt like all of that you had to go. If you were to go down that path, obviously there's no room left for this other path. With evolution, with science, it felt like you are either in this camp or you are in the other camp. And so to go down this way, I was acknowledging,
right.
Okay, well, I'm just closing the door over here because...
Yeah, you can't live in the tension.
Yeah, it doesn't mix. Yeah.
It's
so
either this or that.
Obviously, I'm picking this other one. And yet it's still kind of just...
There's a story that you're probably familiar with in the Bible, where in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, where the boy Samuel is laying in bed and he hears a voice calling out to him, Samuel, Samuel. And he gets up and he goes over to the priest, the old priest Eli, and he goes, yeah, here, what's going on? And Eli's like, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And it happens 3 times. And eventually Eli's like, oh, you keep hearing a voice. It's not me. I bet it's God. So next time you hear it, just say, speak, Lord, I'm listening. And I think that God is always trying to get our attention. And sometimes we're paying attention enough to listen. And to say something like, speak, Lord, I am listening, is like the scariest thing ever. Because what if God has nothing to say? What if it's just met with silence? What if all these different things of like the light and the darkness and all these little things that are coming your way is just met with more disappointment, more silence, more rejection, whatever it is that you have felt? That's scary. And so it's easier just to stay with the things in the box and avoid the box. I get that. But I wonder what it would be for you or for others, or even myself, that when I feel like something outside of myself, something supernatural, something that's unexplainable is saying, Bethany, Bethany, or trying to get my attention somehow. If I actually quieted myself enough and said, okay, God, I'm listening, but with the mindset of, I have no expectation whatsoever. I don't care if you say something. I don't care if you say nothing. I don't care if you reveal something amazing or if it's just silence on the other end. I want to have a heart open to whatever, anything and nothing. I'm open to that. And I think that it's such a freeing space to be, to release those expectations. It doesn't mean that they aren't there somewhere buried in us, because I think that's just what it means to be human. It's just like almost like a physical open posture where you open your hands, you put your face towards the sky and the sun's on your face, and you breathe in and you breathe out. Okay, I'm listening. And it's met with silence, or it's met with a breeze, or it's met with somebody down the road that calls your name and it's a friend that you haven't seen in years, or it's met with a memory of your childhood, or it's met with just the fact that you feel for the first time that you are so cared for and loved. Whatever it is, just that openness. I think God is waiting for all of us to have that posture.
That scares me a little bit.
Yeah.
I think, who I am, I would rather die than ask for help.
Mm.
And in some way, it feels like going down that path would be an admission that I can't walk further than where I am currently in life without help from God. And part of me believes that. Part of me believes that in order to achieve what you want to achieve in life, whether it's your plan, whether it's God's plan, you need to walk with him. But that means I can't do it alone, which scares me. As someone who, I wouldn't even raise my hand to ask questions in class. I wouldn't go, I think throughout my college career, I maybe went to office hours twice, because it was either I'm going to figure it out and do it on my own, or I'm not going to do it. And so the idea that you've reached a point where you can no longer do it alone, that's challenging.
Oh, but man, Nick, I see that your life has constantly been pushing you towards being with others. Like even when you were fully alone, when you felt like totally isolated, and even now in the senses of isolation that you experience still, there's something in you that craves connection with others, deep connection, so much so that you are having strangers meet with you because you crave that. You're designed to crave that. We all are. This is not like a design flaw in you. This is how we are created to live. We are created for deep connections with other people, but also we are created to deeply connect with God. And the way that we connect, and it's so against the culture that we have been brought up in, and we are swimming in this culture. We have absolutely no idea that it's happening to us all the time unless we become more aware of it, but this sense of American individualism, the sense that I am the exception, that I am good on my own, I am independent, and I don't need anybody. I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps because my bootstraps are strong, because I'm a white man and I'm strong, or whatever it is. And there is this sense that we can do it on our own. And I think that is the darkness. That is the darkness saying that you're fine when none of us are. Like, we are meant to be dependent on God and interdependent on each other. And I know that sounds terrible because we want to be the ones that people can either depend on or look up to, or that we would love to lend a helping hand, but we'd never ask for help. I think that that we're not created to be that way. We're created to be so, not like codependent, not like unhealthy codependence, because there's like the other side of that pendulum, but that interdependence with each other and that dependence on God, that you can't do it on your own and you're not meant to. I mentioned when I first got in that my son was involved in an accident last night, and a friend of mine reached out and she said, "Can I bring you guys dinner tonight?" And everything in me said, no, like you don't, I mean, it's a family of 5. I know your finances aren't great. Like, you're a college student, essentially paying off student loans. Like, no, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. But instead I said, yes, that would be great. And I still modified it. I was just like, I mean, we could use more than one pizza. I was just like, just bring one pizza. I've got a frozen one in the freezer. Like, I'm still like trying to like create some sort of sense of, no, we've got this. But when I say I've got this, then I'm stopping somebody else from being a part of my life that has asked to be a part of my life. It's like I'm saying that their part isn't as important as my part.
Yeah. I don't know. That worries me. I don't know if it's just, for whatever reason, I've internalized that. I mean, that you brought up the bootstrap mentality, which has come up a number of times on this podcast.
Oh, really?
And I feel like that is my entire personality in some regard, is the idea that I'll do it alone, that you shouldn't I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm so surprised about doing this podcast is 5 years ago, I didn't believe in talking out your problems or talking about your issues. I felt it was an unjust burden that you were placing on other people. They couldn't solve your problems. So talking about it just makes them suffer because you're the only one that can solve it at the end of the day. So either solve it or don't talk about it. Why are you going to burden other people with your issues? Cut to me now doing a podcast talking about all sorts of things. But I don't know. I don't know.
Where do you think that came from? Like, was that modeled as a child, or was there somebody in your life that seemed to be a taker or especially needy?
I'm not sure. My earliest memory, and I've been thinking about this a lot too, when I was really young, I was probably in elementary school, I used to build birdhouses and sell them.
Okay.
And there was one day I was out, it was probably 5:30, 6 o'clock at night during the winter, and I'm building a birdhouse because I had an order. And normally I could glue up all the sides, I could cut it and then nail it in place with the glue. The glue would hold. And I was doing this over the summer, so it was warm enough that the glue would set and then I could nail it. But it was cold enough this night that the glue was not working. And so I couldn't nail it, and I was out there getting frustrated. And it was getting later and later into the night. And my sister came out. She said, "Dinner's ready, come inside, we're going to eat as a family." And I was like, "I'll be in a sec. I have to finish this." And then maybe 20 minutes go by, she comes out again. "Dinner's ready, we're waiting." Okay, I got to finish this. I can't not finish this. And then maybe 5 minutes later, my dad came out and he was like, "Do you want some help?" And I just started crying because I realized I couldn't do this alone. And I just started crying. I was so upset that who I was in that moment, I didn't have the strength to do this alone. And I think that sums up what this is. And for whatever reason, that is just buried inside of me. That same kid fighting against the elements to do what he needs to do and struggling because of it and can't ask for help.
What would you say to that kid?
Go eat dinner and then do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. I physically could not stop. I had to finish that. I had to build the birdhouse. And I'm sure it's metaphorical for something else, that wasn't just about the birdhouse.
Yeah.
But I haven't thought about it enough to really unpack that situation.
Yeah.
But that's me. That kid is still me at 26.
Yeah. And I want you to know that, like, there's no shame in who you are. Like, you are such a strong person. This is part of who you are. It's something that's valuable and good and important. And I think that all the good parts of our lives, we all have shadow sides that like take the good part and kind of twist it into something that's unhealthy. And so it's important to name those unhealthy aspects. I'll share one of mine. I am a peacemaker. Like, I love peace. I desire it in so many ways. I want people to experience peace. I believe that is like one of the most important things we can offer to each other, is the sense of it's okay. It's okay. It's releasing. It feels so good. I think we were meant for it. The sense of like connection, that peaceful connection. Also, I avoid conflict like the plague. And so I might be a peacemaker and I want to continually make peace, but I'm also a peacekeeper and will try to avoid the conflict by keeping the peace and taking everything that is unraveling and scary and conflict of happening around me, and I'll try to like push it underneath the rug and avoid it and like whistle past it and try to pretend that it's not there. So both of those things exist in me. Less the peacekeeping now that I'm more aware of it, and I've been practicing stepping into places of conflict without trying to run away and without crying the whole time. So I think that there is the good parts of you with that, and then there's also the shadow side with you of that. I think that's true for every single person. And so one of the things that I would recommend, and you don't have to do this, of course, but something that my therapist did for me when it came to like my own sense of self-worth and feeling like I needed to be validated, and she helped me walk through like my 14-year-old self, like all the things that I felt when I was 14, 15 years old. And she said, look at that 14 or 15-year-old. Like, what would you tell her about herself? Like, what do you value about her? What do you think is beautiful about her? What do you think that she needs to hear from you today? And that was really, I know it sounds a little like therapeutic, I get that and everything, a little woo-woo. But it was so good for me to validate my 14-year-old self that was so insecure and didn't think that I mattered at all. To say that she is beautiful, that she matters, that she is a delight as a human. I think that was important for me. And so I don't know what is important for you, but maybe it's not go inside and eat dinner. Maybe it's, I like how hard of a worker you are. You've got a lot of gumption. I can see that the work that you do on those birdhouses matter because it makes you feel like you matter. Whatever it is. And you can validate that kid, validate yourself, but recognize that it's not just about eating dinner. It's about connecting with the family. It's about your dad saying, can I help? And you being able to say that next time, I'd love some help.
Yeah, I struggle with the idea of help.
I know.
And I think that's what, in a weird way, I think God is an extension of acknowledging needing help.
Yeah.
I think that's why it worked out so well for me to walk down the other path, was because I don't need help. And so if this is the path of acknowledging and accepting that you do, well, that's not a door that I'm going to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why it's so frustrating that it keeps creeping up.
It's creeping up for a reason, my friend. It's creeping up for a reason. Yeah. Yeah. I just keep paying attention to that. I don't know what God wants to do with you there, or what even your heart and your soul want to do with it there, but something's happening. And you can choose to ignore it or avoid it. And maybe you just need to for the season to ignore and avoid it. I don't think there's any shame there either. But someday you're going to have to open it.
I think that's a good metaphor for life.
Yeah.
Is you can avoid in the short term, but life keeps coming.
It sure does.
You're going to have to address the issues at some point.
Yep.
Or you could just be, a 60-year-old adult that still has a ton of baggage they have to unpack. And we've all heard those stories.
Yeah. Yeah, let's not be those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's emblematic of where we are in our culture as well, that there's just a global shift away from religion in a lot of forms.
Yes.
And a lot of conflict around religion, where you almost look down on if you do. I mean, hearing people talk this openly about God, I only hear that in podcasts. Like, I'm sure I'm not in the same circles you are, so they might be a little more open about it. But having this conversation, I don't get that on a daily basis or weekly or monthly basis. It's kind of one of those things that, you don't really talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think the things that we hear most of the time when it comes to religion, especially regarding Christianity, or even, well, I won't go there, but is a lot of Christian nationalism, a lot of like take back the country, a lot of idolizing certain people and certain political parties and certain ways of living, and it's real gross. It's real gross.
Well, and not even to that extreme. I've heard people say, even believing that your rights are ordained by God is now Christian nationalism. That just that extension, we've now shifted the bar so low that it's almost anyone who believes in God is now a Christian nationalist.
Yes. Yeah, and that's really frightening. I think that words they hold meaning, like they hold weight. And sometimes we throw words around. But yeah, so I'm thinking of like the word Christian and how it's attached to nationalism. And that word was never meant to be attached to king and country. It was meant to actually be an insult towards followers of Jesus. Christian means little Christ, and so it was supposed to be something that was demeaning. And eventually, it was adopted as a term. But Christian is today. It's not the same thing as a disciple or a Christ follower, because it's just a term. It's just a name. It's a religious preference. It's a bully pulpit sometimes, and just because somebody says they're a Christian by name doesn't mean that they actually are following Jesus and the ways of Jesus and seeking out what it means to love your enemies and to live in a way of peace and to care for the marginalized and oppressed. Most of the time, that word is associated with keeping out undocumented people and policing women's bodies, unfortunately. So it's a sad term now in many ways. I think it's redeemable. I think that we can redeem that word Christian, and I'm not afraid to use it for myself at all. But there's a lot of assumptions that come with it now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's almost an uphill battle.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, when I tell people that I'm a pastor, actually I try to avoid telling people I'm a pastor if I meet them, because it usually just shuts down conversation.
Isn't that sad that that's where we are?
Yeah, it's either it shuts it down completely or I become like their confessional or something. Like, let me tell you everything. Yes, okay, let's do this.
Does that get draining? That aspect of you kind
times.
Of being a catch-all for people's problems when they hear that?
It depends on the person. It just depends on the person. There are some people that are just, like I can tell their intention. If they need a space to speak what's happening internally, I feel very honored that they would trust me with their life. But there are some people that are like soul suckers, essentially. And it doesn't matter who they're talking to. It could be me or a different pastor. They'll say the same thing and without taking any responsibility for themselves and never actually interested in me as a person, just like me as a sponge.
Soul sucker is a great term for that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few of them.
There's a lot of them out there in life.
Yeah.
You almost have to dodge them.
And I think that's sometimes part of this idea of like, I don't want to be a burden towards anybody because I don't want to be seen as a soul sucker or somebody who feels like they're too needy, or I don't want to be somebody that like pushes people away because of my needs. And that can make us choose not to be honest and vulnerable with each other, like to share, I do need help. because there's a fear that if I ask for help and you don't help or you can't, then I'm getting rejected in some way. And that fear of rejection, it stems from our own sense of self-hatred, and this is why we hate people, because we hate ourselves. It's just this, yeah, I know that that's kind of a big thing to say. It's probably too broad, but yeah, a lot of that comes from not wanting to be like those people there. So I'm just going to avoid saying anything at all.
With a lot of the turmoil currently in the world, do you relate that to biblical stories? I mean, Cain and Abel, do you feel like there's this strife is a sort of darkness that seems to be gripping people?
I do not. When you say like biblical stories, do you mean like end times sort of things,
No,
or
I mean,
trying to make sense of the times from the Bible?
These themes of the pull of good and evil, that it's this constant fight, and it feels like people are kind of embracing that individualist aspect and leaning in a direction that might not be best for everyone.
Yeah, I think that the Bible has a lot to say about it. Absolutely. And I think it has to do with that sense of who is my enemy? Who is the person that I can point to and blame and say they're the problem? We need to shut them down, shut them out. If they were gone, everything would be better. If they no longer existed, we can finally breathe. It's I think it's absolutely biblical, and it's just what it means to be human.
Do you relate it at all to end times? Since you brought that up, I wasn't thinking about that, but I have had people say, who are pretty religious, that it feels like we're in the end times. Well,
I think Jesus talked about things like that a little bit. He talked a lot more about money and greed and and loving your enemies than he did about like future tripping. But I mean, he talked about it being the end times when he was there. I think we're always living in the end times. But to try to like give some sort of to point to something specific and say, look, this is the end times, or this is what we need to look for, or this is the thing we need to focus on. I think we're just always focusing on the wrong things then. I think the end times becomes its own sort of idol that the church gets distracted by, and trying to like make sure that it happens in this way, or predicting some sort of end result instead of freaking loving the people around you. Like, why do we focus so much on the things we have no idea of? And even Jesus says, like, stop focusing on this. It's going to come like a thief in the night. You're never going to know it's coming. Like, just keep at the work that I have called you to do, and then I'll take care of the rest. And I think that that's what it means to be people of Christ. It's like, I'm trusting God with all of it. Whatever happens is God's business. It's not mine. God didn't put me in charge. That's God's business. And I get to just do the work of loving people and forgiving myself and forgiving others, and that's it. That's it. It's really simple and super complicated.
Yeah, people like to get hung up on the future fear predicting.
Yeah.
Of, these are the signs of the end times, so this is what we need to be focused on.
Yeah, prepared. Yeah, and that's something that was definitely like hammered into me when I was a youth, for sure. Like, I was really afraid that I would be left behind or whatever, and wake up with nightmares as a kid, and it was really horrifying. And now I'm able to joke about it, so that's good. Maybe there's some healing.
Come full circle, yeah. Yeah, I think people are just attracted to fear in a weird way.
Yeah.
Where we're primed to pay attention to whatever scares us.
Totally.
And that can be monopolized in some pretty dark ways.
Yeah, fear sells very well. Like, even the fear of hell, I don't want to get into that necessarily, but like, some people believe that without hell, without like a pitchfork prodding a person forward, then why would they ever choose Jesus? Why would they choose God if there wasn't some sort of fear of hell that was guiding their way? And I'm just like, that is some messed up theology that I was fed most of my life. It's very common. It's not some sort of, side theology. It's pretty much in there. So instead of just seeing, no, it's the love of God that draws us to God, not some sort of fear of something else.
How do you separate out those ideas that you were taught when you were a kid? So I'd imagine, it's pretty effective when you are young and vulnerable and you get these ideas implanted in you. How did you start separating out, okay, this is what I believe versus this is what they taught me to believe.
Yeah, I think it's helpful once our brains are more fully developed, usually around the age of 25, to be okay with questions and doubts. I think I grew up in an era, and still exists today, of course, of like apologetics, being that you can be confident in your faith 100%, that you can have an answer for anything. Even like the Bible says, be prepared to give an answer for the faith that you have, which is not the same thing as be prepared to give an answer for atonement theory, or be prepared to give an answer for creation versus evolution. That's not what that means. It's just, where does this joy come from? Be prepared to answer that. Like, where does this hope come from? Be prepared to answer that. And it doesn't come in some sort of formula like, oh, well, let me take you down the Romans road so that way you can come to salvation. It's just, yeah. Anyway, I think allowing the questions and doubts to exist without being afraid of them is really important, and allowing there not to be answers. When you look at Jesus, every time that somebody asked him a question, almost every time he answered it with another question. So questions are important without answers. And so I don't think we're supposed to have some sort of formula. I think the first thing that made me question everything was the creation versus evolution, sort of a debate that was happening, and being homeschooled. And there's this creationist named Ken Ham, and I went to like a couple of his workshops as a preteen. And there was one workshop where we were supposed to dissect eggs in the different stages of gestation. And I was so appalled by this. I felt like this thing that we were doing was so hypocritical, because my whole life I've been taught that abortion is wrong. And here we are aborting these chickens just in front of everybody else. And that was like one of the first things that ever actually made me question what it was that I was handed. And so I took all the eggs and I put them in my backpack, and I brought them home and put them under a heat lamp. And most of them didn't survive, but I hatched like three chickens from those eggs. And ever since then, my faith was ruined from that perspective. But yeah, I think if we build our faith like a house of cards, where if anything becomes shaky, then the whole thing might fall down, then we have to avoid the questions. We have to avoid the doubts. It's too scary.
And not having an answer is scary.
Yeah.
Just accepting that you don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of shame I think for myself, there was a lot of shame built into me with that. Not from my parents. This was mostly just from like youth group type stuff. My parents were really open towards a lot of different perspectives. They were very kind and wonderful people. They are kind and wonderful people. But yeah, a lot of like youth group type stuff, evangelism. If you aren't saving people left and right, if you're not like telling them about Jesus, by the time you get off the elevator, then you've lost a soul or whatever. There was a lot of like shame and fear-based learning that I had.
Which unfortunately kind of dilutes the message as a whole when you have these kind of more extreme stances on it.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Yeah. How do you fix that? It's an interesting place where, God means so many different things to so many different people, and the sense of spirituality within that. And where do you find your place in all of that? You almost have to carve out your own path for what it means for you as a person. Yeah,
I think God is bigger, more expansive than the Christian faith allows sometimes. But I think for us, from my perspective, my beliefs, my own convictions, I believe God is best seen through Jesus Christ. And so to know God is to know Christ, and to know Christ is to know each other, because Jesus says that when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he is there. So to know more about Jesus is to know more about each other, and to know more about God is to know more about Jesus. And it's just all of us together connecting. those interconnections and dependence on God.
That's life.
That's life.
Okay, well, Bethany, thanks for sitting down and chatting with me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Welcome. Yeah, me too. This was really fun.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do it again.
Stoked.
Do you want to plug where people can find you, where they can find the church, your blog, all your stuff, your books?
Yeah. We're in Lent, and I have a book called Stepping into Lent. It's a daily devotional based on a prayer book that I follow. And so you can find that on Amazon. There's another part of the church calendar called Advent that prepares people for Christmas. And there's a book called Stepping into Advent. You can also find that on Amazon. And I have a blog called withbethany.com. I'm not super on the blog right now, but there's some nice old articles if you want to peruse that. My church is called Catalyst Church. We meet right next to the co-op in Arcata. There's like a 3-story building. We're right next to, in the middle of Foodwise and a surf shop. And we meet at 11 o'clock. I also pastor another church called Arcata United Methodist Church, and that's at 9:30, and they are in Arcata as well. And that's where you can find me. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Bethany.Nass Cseh, CSEH.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Bethany.
Thanks.